My name is Odessa Lane. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has treated me like background noise in my own life. Not hated, not even openly disliked, just ignored. In our house, I was always labeled the reliable one, the kid who didn't cause problems, the kid who would be fine no matter what. Which in my parents' language really meant they never had to pay attention to me. All the attention, the praise, the proud speeches at family dinners, those were reserved for my older brother, Evan Lane, and his perfectly polished life. When I shared something good, I'd get the occasional distracted "That's nice, sweetheart," tossed over someone's shoulder while my parents refreshed the family group chat to read Evan's latest accomplishment. This Christmas was supposed to be about him again. My mom had called it a small celebration for your brother's promotion. Like I was just another chair added to the table. What they didn't know was that a few weeks earlier I had wired more money into my bank account than anyone in my entire family had ever seen in their lives combined. They had no idea that my little side project, the one they used to roll their eyes at the one they called a distraction from a real career, had quietly turned into a company that someone had just bought for $170 million. So there I was, sitting at the dining table in my parents' house in Raleigh, North Carolina, staring at the carved Christmas ham and the mismatched holiday plates we'd used every year since I was a kid. Listening to them praise Evan the way they always did, laughing at his stories, toasting his future, and feeling that old familiar burn rising in my chest. Then Evan made one comment too many. He glanced at me with that half smirk he always used when he was about to make a joke at my expense. "So, Odessa," he said, swirling his wine glass, "still surviving on that adorable nurse salary. And how's your cute little tech hobby going?" Something inside me snapped into perfect calm. I looked him straight in the eye and said as casually as I could, "I sold my company." He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Your little useless startup," he said. For how much? I took a sip of water and answered, $170 million. His jaw dropped. My mom's face drained of color. My dad's fork slipped from his hand and clattered against the plate. What happened after that changed my family forever. And not in the warm, sentimental Christmas movie way they always like to pretend we were. But before I tell you what happened after I got up and left that table, please tell me what country you're in and what time it is. I always find it fascinating how far these complicated family stories spread. I also have a small note. What you are about to hear contains some fictional details and uses AI to enhance emotional depth and the message, and is not intended to refer to any person or organization. I hope you enjoy it. If not, please get some rest and take care of yourself. The story will be here when you return. If you've ever been the invisible child in a family, you learn something early. Love can have a ranking system. Growing up as Odessa Lane meant understanding that without anyone ever saying it out loud. And in our house, I was never in first place. I was the kid who came home with science fair ribbons and straight A's in biology, the one who stayed up late studying and asked teachers extra questions after class. My older brother Evan Lane was the one who scored the winning touchdowns, the one whose name boomed across the stadium speakers on Friday nights. Guess which achievement my parents framed on the living room wall? They like to call me low maintenance. They said it like it was praise. "Odessa doesn't need all that fuss," my mom Marianne Lane would say, while adjusting Evan's tie for the third time before one of his award ceremonies. When I got accepted into a competitive nursing program on a full scholarship, my dad Richard Lane smiled briefly and said, "That's great, sweetheart. Nurses are helpful." Then he immediately turned to Evan. "So how's the business program going, son?" Just like that, my biggest moment became background noise again. It always felt like my life was the opening act for the real show. But here's the strange thing about being ignored. It gives you space to grow in directions no one is watching. While my family stayed glued to Evan's highlight reel, I was learning things that didn't come with applause. how to read EKG monitors, how to start an IV in under 30 seconds, how to keep my voice calm while someone's heart stopped in front of me. Right after graduating, I took a job as a night shift ER nurse at a busy hospital in Raleigh. And what nobody in my family understood was how much chaos I handled every single night. Car crashes, stroke victims, overdose cases, people coming in barely breathing. At 3 in the morning, decisions had to be made in seconds. The difference between someone waking up tomorrow or never waking up again often depended on small choices made in rooms filled with alarms and flashing lights. My family never asked about any of that. To them, I was just working nights. But during those long shifts between emergency calls and charting reports, something else started happening. In the quiet moments when the ER slowed down and other nurses scrolled their phones to stay awake, I started scribbling ideas on scraps of paper. I kept seeing the same problems again and again: chaotic staffing, missed handoffs between doctors and nurses, dangerous delays because no one had a clear picture of who was where and what was happening in real time. The system was held together with sticky notes and shouted updates down hallways. It felt like medicine from 20 years ago trying to survive in the present. So I started imagining something better, a system that could connect everyone in the emergency department instantly, a real-time coordination platform designed specifically for ER teams. I didn't know how to build something like that on my own, but I knew someone who might. Her name was Sofia Alvarez, a programmer I had met during a college tech workshop. When I told her the idea, she didn't laugh. Instead, she said something I'll never forget. That actually sounds like it could change hospitals. Together, we started building a platform we eventually called Pulse Bridge. At first, it was barely functional, a rough prototype with glitchy dashboards and messy code. My schedule became brutal. I would drag myself home from the hospital at 7 in the morning, shower, collapse into bed for a few hours, then wake up and jump on video calls with Sophia. We debugged features while my neighbors were cooking dinner. Then I'd grab coffee, throw on my scrubs, and head back for another 12-hour shift. Day after day, week after week. My family knew about exactly 1% of this. To them, nothing had changed. I was still just Odessa, the quiet nurse who worked nights, the daughter they never had to worry about. What they didn't realize was that while they were watching Evan's career take off, something else was slowly being built in the background. Something that would eventually change all of our lives, and the moment that would prove it was closer than any of them could have imagined. While Sophia and I were building Pulse Bridge in quiet corners of our lives, nothing in my family's world seemed to change. To them, I was still just working night shifts. And in my mom Marianne's mind, that translated to something very simple. It meant I still wasn't doing anything interesting enough to post about on Facebook. Meanwhile, they knew every single detail of Evan's life. My brother had become an investment analyst at a fast-growing firm in Charlotte. Soon after that, he was already talking about the fast track to partnership. Then came the condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the skyline. My parents helped him buy it. They dipped into a portion of their retirement savings for the down payment and proudly called it investing in his future. When I asked if they could co-sign a small line of credit so Sophia and I could quit our second jobs and focus on Pulse Bridge full-time, my dad Richard didn't even hesitate. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh, just the kind that says your idea doesn't exist in the same category as reality. "Sweetheart," he said, shaking his head. "Apps are a fad. Be realistic. Nursing is your backup plan. Remember, don't risk that on some tech fantasy." It was strange hearing that. My stable life-saving job was a backup plan when it belonged to me. But Evan's spreadsheets were apparently visionary. Life went on like that for months. Then one night, everything changed. I was halfway through a brutal shift in the ER. It was close to 2 in the morning, and I was sitting in the staff lounge on a plastic chair that had probably been there since the 90s. I had my phone face down on my lap, and I must have drifted off for a few minutes. When I finally picked it up, I noticed 3 missed calls from an unknown number, and 1 missed call from Sophia. There was also a text message, all caps. "Answer your phone." My stomach dropped. I stood up immediately and stepped into a supply closet so the noise from the ER wouldn't drown out the call. Boxes of gloves and IV kits surrounded me as I dialed her back. My heart already racing, she answered on the first ring. For a second, she couldn't even speak. She was crying and laughing at the same time. "Odessa," she said between breaths. "We got it." I leaned against the metal shelving unit. "Got what the pilot program. The hospital board approved it. They're rolling out Pulse Bridge." My brain struggled to catch up. For months, we had been pitching the platform to hospital administrators who nodded politely and then disappeared into endless review processes. But Sophia wasn't finished. "And that's not even the biggest part," she said. There was a pause. "A medical software company in San Francisco wants to acquire us." The number she said next made my knees buckle. I had to grab the shelf to stay upright. It didn't feel real. I finished the rest of my shift in a daze. I inserted IV lines, checked vitals, updated charts, and spoke to patients' families like nothing had happened. But inside my head, everything had changed. The next week became a blur of phone calls, contracts, and paperwork. Between treating patients and grabbing coffee in hospital hallways, I was suddenly speaking with lawyers, signing NDAs, and negotiating acquisition terms. Around the same time, my parents sent me a digital invitation in the family group chat. It was a glossy flyer for Evan's promotion party at his firm. There was a champagne emoji next to the words, "So proud of you, Evan." While that message sat unread on my phone, I was sitting in a glass conference room downtown, signing documents that transferred ownership of a company Sophia and I had built, with sleepless nights, energy drinks, and stubborn refusal to quit. And then, the wire transfer arrived. $170 million. After taxes, legal fees, and investor shares, there was still more money left than I had ever imagined seeing in my lifetime. I opened my banking app and just stared at the screen. For a moment, I genuinely thought it might glitch and disappear. I sat in my car afterward and cried. Not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, I realized that everything I had built had happened without my family ever noticing. That night, I still went to work. Patients still needed their vitals checked. Medications still needed to be passed. Life in the ER didn't care about wire transfers, and I didn't tell my parents. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. They would minimize it, misunderstand it, or worse, rewrite the story so it sounded like they had always believed in me, even though they had never once asked a real question about what I was building. And that was when a quiet idea started forming in my mind. If I was going to tell them the truth, I was going to do it in a way they would never forget. And the perfect moment was already on the calendar. Christmas dinner, the night they were planning to celebrate Evan again. That thought stayed with me. If I was ever going to tell them the truth, it couldn't be in a quiet phone call or a casual text message. It had to happen in a moment where they couldn't ignore it or brush it aside. About a week before Christmas, my mom Marianne called. Her voice had that bright, excited tone she used whenever something in Evan's life was being celebrated. "We're doing a special dinner this year for your brother's promotion," she said. "You can make it right." I almost laughed. Not a Christmas dinner, not a family gathering, a dinner for your brother. The wording said everything. And that was the moment the idea in my head finally solidified. I wasn't going to show up wearing designer clothes. I wasn't going to hint at anything or drop clues like I was begging for their attention. No, I was going to sit at that table exactly the way they expected me to. Quiet, polite, invisible. And when Evan inevitably made one of his usual jokes about my little nurse job or my cute tech hobby, I would calmly say, The number that would split their version of reality wide open. $170 million. Was it a little petty? Okay, maybe a little. But mostly, I was just tired. Tired of being edited out of my own family's story. Christmas Day arrived cold and clear. I drove over to my parents' house and parked my same old beat-up Honda at the curb. That alone helped the plan. No luxury car, no expensive handbag, nothing that screamed multimillionaire. Just me. Black jeans, a soft green sweater, and the same winter coat I'd owned since nursing school. The house looked exactly the same as every holiday I could remember. Strings of tangled lights along the gutters, a plastic reindeer leaning slightly to one side in the yard, a wreath on the door with a red bow that had faded over the years. Inside, I could already hear music playing. My mom's laughter floated through the house mixed with my dad Richard's deep voice booming over whatever story he was telling. For a moment, I stood there with my hand on the doorknob. The metal felt cold under my fingers. I took a slow breath. This wasn't just about money. It was about walking back into the same battlefield I had grown up on and refusing to play the same role. I pushed the door open. Odessa finally. My mom Marianne swooped toward me almost immediately. She smelled like cinnamon and the same floral perfume she'd worn for years. She hugged me quickly, then pulled back, and smoothed my hair the way she used to when I was 8 years old. "You look tired," she said, studying my face. "Are you still doing those crazy night shifts I keep telling you, sweetheart? You should find something calmer before you burn yourself out." "Good to see you too, Mom," I said with a small smile. "Yeah, still working nights." She made a little sympathetic noise like I had just told her I was going through a phase she didn't quite approve of. Then she turned toward the living room. "Your brother's already here," she said brightly. "He brought this amazing artisan wine. So thoughtful. We're saving it for dinner." Of course he did. I stepped further inside, taking off my boots near the door. And right on cue there he was. Evan Lane. Standing in the middle of the living room like he owned the place. His hair perfectly styled. An expensive watch gleaming under the lights. A fitted dress shirt with the sleeves rolled just enough to look effortless. He was in the middle of telling a story about a meeting with one of the senior partners at his firm, while my dad sat in his recliner listening like every word was a headline. Evan noticed me after a moment and walked over with a grin. "Well, look who escaped the hospital dungeon," he said, raising his glass. "Did they finally let you out for the holidays?" "We don't chain patients to the walls anymore," I replied dryly. "But yeah, they gave me the night off." He laughed like he thought he was charming. "So how's that project thing you've been messing with?" he asked casually. "That app idea?" "It's been busy," I said. "We've had a lot going on." Before I could say anything else, my dad Richard waved a hand dismissively. "Just make sure you don't let that distract you from your real work," he said. "Nursing is a solid career. Practical. You've always been our practical kid." He glanced proudly toward Evan. "Ryan's the one with the high-stakes career." My brother lifted his glass and tapped it lightly against Dad's. "Big clients," he said with a grin. "Big decisions. The firm's already talking about my future there." My mom clasped her hands together like she was watching a proud moment at a graduation ceremony. "We're just so proud of you, Evan," she said softly. I stood there quietly, invisible again. Exactly the way it had always been. But this time I knew something they didn't, and soon enough they were all going to find out. For a moment nothing about the evening felt unusual. That was the strange thing about old family patterns. They repeat themselves so perfectly that you can almost predict every line before it's spoken. My mom looked at me again, her brows pinching slightly. "Are you still doing those crazy night shifts?" she asked. "I keep telling you, honey, you should find something calmer. You don't want to burn out before you're 30. "Good to see you too, Mom," I said as I slipped off my boots. "Yeah, still nights. Somebody has to keep people alive while you're sleeping." She made a soft tutting sound like I had just made an overly dramatic joke and turned away before I even finished speaking. "Your brother's already here," she called over her shoulder. "He brought that artisanal wine. So thoughtful. We're saving it for dinner." Of course we were. I followed her into the living room, and there he was. Evan Lane stood right in the center of the room like it had been designed around him. Perfectly styled hair, a sleek watch that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to, a slim dress shirt with the sleeves rolled just enough to make it look effortless. He was in the middle of telling a story about one of the senior partners at his firm, pulling him aside in the hallway to talk about big future plans. My dad Richard sat in his recliner listening like every word was a headline. Evan finally noticed me and walked over with a grin wine glass in hand. "Well, look who made it," he said. "I know those night shifts can be brutal. Did they finally let you out of the hospital dungeon?" "We don't chain patients to the walls anymore," I replied. "But yeah, they gave me the night off." He laughed like he thought he was charming. "So how's that thing you were working on?" he asked casually. "The data. Something, that little app idea." "It's been busy," I said, keeping my face neutral. "We've had a lot going on." Before I could say anything else, my dad chimed in. "Well, just make sure it doesn't distract you from your real work," he said, waving a hand vaguely. "Nursing is a solid job. Practical." Then he looked proudly at Evan. "You've always been our practical kid," he added to me, "the one we don't have to worry about." He nodded toward my brother. "Evan's the one with the big pressure career." Evan raised his glass and lightly clinked it against Dad's. "High stakes," he said with a confident smile. "Big clients. Big decisions." The partners literally used the words "future partner" in front of the entire team. My mom clasped her hands to her chest like she was watching a proud moment at a graduation. "We are just so proud of you, sweetheart," she said. "Tonight is all about celebrating you." I stood there quietly, invisible, exactly the way I had been my entire life. There it was again. "We don't have to worry about you." It sounded kind, supportive even, but what it really meant was something else entirely. "We don't think about you." I drifted into the kitchen to help with dinner. Not because I felt particularly helpful, but because it gave my hands something to do other than shake. Chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, setting plates. The rhythm of holiday cooking was familiar enough to calm me down. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Sofia Alvarez. "You okay?" Then another message right after. "Remember, they don't decide your value. You do." I smiled despite myself. She knew exactly where I was tonight. I typed back, "Showtime soon." When dinner was finally ready, we all gathered around the dining table. The seating arrangement told the entire story of our family dynamic without anyone needing to say a word. Evan sat in the center of one side of the table. My parents sat on either side of him like he was the guest of honor at some formal gala. And me, they had placed me at the far end of the table near the sideboard, within easy reach of the serving dishes. Perfect for passing food. Perfect for collecting empty plates. A built-in waitress. Classic. My dad began pouring wine into everyone's glasses. Then he lifted his own and stood slightly. To Evan, he said, his eyes shining. To his promotion, his hard work, and everything he's going to accomplish. "Your mother and I couldn't be prouder." To Evan, my mom echoed warmly, "Our star." I raised my glass too. Partly because not doing so would have made the moment awkward, but mostly because I wanted them comfortable, relaxed, following the same old script they always had. Evan took a sip of wine and glanced at me with that small, smug smile that said he knew exactly where he ranked in this family. Then he leaned back in his chair and spoke again. "So, Odessa," he said casually, like a talk show host tossing a question to a background guest, Still pulling double shifts and living off vending machine snacks at the hospital, I met his eyes calmly. The moment was getting closer. Closer than any of them realized. Evan leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. Still pulling double shifts and eating stale vending machine snacks, he said with a smirk. "You've got to get out of that grind, little sis. Maybe someday I'll get you an interview at my firm." He said it like it was a joke. But underneath the joke was the same condescending tone I'd heard my entire life. The same tone he used last Thanksgiving when he laughed and said that if my little app ever made any money, he'd buy me something nice. A real purse, he had said. For a moment, my chest tightened. Old habits told me to swallow the feeling. Smile politely. Let it pass. But this time, I didn't. Instead, I let that feeling sharpen me. I glanced down at the table. The carved ham. The bowl of mashed potatoes. The candle flickering softly in the center. I thought about every moment my parents had brushed past me to get to Evan. Every time my achievements became a footnote in the story of his life. And in that moment, I quietly decided something. I was done. I didn't blurt anything out. That would have been too easy for them to dismiss as Odessa being emotional. Instead, I waited. I let the conversation keep moving through its familiar loops. Evan's promotion. The impressive clients at his firm. Names of companies my parents repeated proudly even though they clearly didn't understand what any of them actually did. I nodded along politely. "Oh wow. That's big. How do you feel about that?" The kind of neutral responses nurses use when we're calmly assessing a patient. But inside my head, something else was happening. I was counting beats, like a conductor waiting for the exact moment to cue the orchestra. And finally, the opening appeared. My mom turned toward me with the polite curiosity people use for small talk. "So, honey," she said, topping off Evan's wine glass before she even looked at mine. "What about you? Same hospital, same, what do you call it? Ward, ER. Same ER, I said calmly, but a lot has changed this year." My dad nodded vaguely. "Well, as long as you're stable," he said. "That's what matters. The world needs good nurses." Evan snorted quietly. "Yeah, and she's got that little app thing, remember?" he added. He even lifted his fingers and made exaggerated air quotes. "That thing she's always experimenting with." He leaned forward slightly. "How's that going?" "Odessa? Still asking the universe to manifest $1 million? The table chuckled. It hurt. But strangely, it also helped. Because they had just handed me the moment on a silver platter. I slowly set my fork down on the table, gently, carefully, so the sound wouldn't distract from what I was about to say. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice almost bored, "I'm not manifesting $1 million anymore." Evan tilted his head. "Oh yeah," he said. "You finally give up on that little fantasy." "No," I said calmly, meeting his eyes. "I sold my company." The words landed in the room like glass shattering on tile. The silence didn't happen all at once. The laughter just died. Slowly. Like everyone realized at the same moment that I wasn't joking. My mom's smile froze. My dad blinked twice. Evan frowned slightly like he was trying to process what he'd just heard. What he asked? "I sold my company," I repeated. "PulseBridge, the ER coordination platform I've been building the last few years." I paused for a moment. "We finalized the deal 3 weeks ago." Evan's frown slowly turned into a smirk like relief had washed over him. "Okay," he said, with a small laugh. "Okay, Miss CEO." Then he leaned forward. "So how much did your little worthless business sell?" For the word worthless carried history. Last Thanksgiving, he'd thrown that same word at me during an argument when I refused to give him money for one of his investments. "You're a nurse, Odessa," he had said. "You make decent money, but you're not exactly swimming in it. That app is worthless until proven otherwise." Back then, I had let it slide. Not tonight. I took a small sip of water. Kept my hands steady. Then I answered, $170 million. Evan laughed. Too loud. Get out of here, he said. She's joking. My mom immediately jumped in. That's not funny, Odessa, she said quickly, trying to regain control of the moment. Talking about money like that is tacky. I'm not joking, I said calmly. $170 million. A healthcare software company in San Francisco acquired PulseBridge earlier this month. I'll be consulting with them for the next few years, and I still hold equity in their parent company. After taxes and investor payouts, I'm doing just fine. As the words settled in the room, I watched the color slowly drain from my mom's face. It was like someone had pulled a plug. My dad's jaw loosened slightly. He looked at me the way patients sometimes look at a heart monitor when the numbers don't match what they expected. Confused. Disoriented. Evan's laughter faded. Completely. You're lying, he said finally. Do you think revealing that I sold my company for $170 million right there at the dinner table after years of being mocked and ignored is about to make my entire family face the consequences of how they treated me? If you believe this moment will make them pay a heavy price for it, leave a number 1 in the comments. I'm curious how many of you see what's coming next. The word hung in the air. You're lying, Evan said again, more forcefully this time, as if repeating it might make it true. You can't just... People don't just sell things for that kind of money. He gestured toward me with a sharp motion. You still drive that beat-up car. You still live in that old apartment with the squeaky stairs. If you really had that kind of money, we would know. I tilted my head slightly. Why? I asked calmly. The question made him pause. Because I continued. You've never actually asked about my work before. You barely listen when I talk about my patients, let alone the company I've been building. I looked around the table. You all assumed you knew my entire life because you knew my job title. You know the hours I work, I said quietly, but you have no idea what I've built with those hours. My mom, Marianne, gripped her napkin tightly in her hands. Odessa, sweetheart, she said nervously. If this is some kind of joke to ruin your brother's celebration, I'm not trying to ruin anything, I said, cutting in before she could finish. My patience was thinning. I'm sharing news at a family dinner. That is what this is supposed to be, right? A family dinner. My dad Richard cleared his throat, searching for something stable to hold onto in the conversation. If this is true, he said slowly, why didn't you tell us earlier? Why wouldn't you come to us first? That question actually made me laugh. A short, bitter laugh. Come to you first, I repeated. Like when I asked you to co-sign a small line of credit and you told me to be realistic, or when I tried explaining what PulseBridge did and you said you didn't understand tech things and immediately changed the subject back to Evan's quarterly bonus. The room went completely still. Evan's eyes moved quickly between me and our parents. For the first time that night, something like panic flickered across his face. He had always been the main character in this room. Suddenly, he wasn't. All right, he said after a moment, forcing out a small laugh. Let's say this is real. He leaned forward slightly. Show us. Show me your account. Show me something. There was an edge of desperation in his voice now. Normally, I would have hated the idea of pulling out my phone to prove my worth with numbers, but in that moment, I understood exactly what I was doing. I reached under the table and opened my banking app. I pulled up one of the accounts and placed my phone face up between the plates. I didn't show everything, just enough. Enough zeros to make my dad suddenly suck in a breath. Enough for my mom's hand to fly to her mouth. Enough for Evan's eyes to widen, then narrow as he tried to process what he was seeing. It was the kind of math you don't need a calculator to solve, because the conclusion was obvious. He was no longer the most successful child at this table. Holy, Evan muttered before cutting himself off when our mom shot him a warning look. He stared at the screen like he could somehow force the numbers to change. This doesn't make sense, he said. Then he looked up at me again. You. How that one word said everything. You. The daughter they never had to worry about. The nurse with practical shoes and night shifts. The quiet sibling who clapped politely while everyone toasted Evan's achievements. It's not complicated, I said. I saw a problem at work. I built something to fix it. And people with the power to change things saw its value. So they paid for it. My mom shook her head slowly. But you never told us, she whispered. Not a word. We're your parents. We should have known. Should you? I asked softly. Because every time I tried to talk about Pulse Bridge, you talked over me. I'd start explaining something and you'd say, "That's nice, honey," and then ask Evan about his latest meeting. You know every detail of his job. But you can't even tell me the name of the hospital where I work without stopping to think. My dad straightened slightly. Now hold on, he said defensively. We've supported you. We've always been proud of you. I leaned forward. Years of swallowed words finally clawing their way out. You supported Evan, I said. You cashed out part of your retirement to help him buy his condo. You co-signed his first car. When he lost that investment 2 years ago, you called it a learning experience. I paused. When I asked for a fraction of that support, you told me I was being reckless. Evan's face flushed red. That's not fair, he snapped. They knew I had real prospects. You were just playing around with code on your laptop. You mean the code you laughed at? I asked quietly. The one you said looked like a school project before taking a photo and sending it to your friends as a joke. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The memory had clearly hit him. My mom looked between us, visibly shaken. We didn't know, she murmured. We had no idea it was serious. Then she added something that made my stomach twist. Why didn't you push harder? Make us listen. There it was. The blame turning back toward me. Classic. Because I was tired, I said quietly. Tired of begging my own parents to treat me like more than a side character in Evan's success story. Tired of explaining my life to people who had already decided who I was. The room felt smaller somehow. The air heavier. Even though snow was falling quietly outside. My dad slowly set his fork down on the table. So what now? He asked, his voice strangely small. You're rich. You don't need us anymore. I've never needed you for money, I said. I needed you to care. I needed you to look at me and see more than someone who would be fine no matter what. Suddenly, Evan pushed his chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floor. So what, he demanded. You came here to show off? To humiliate me? To make them feel guilty? You couldn't just tell us like a normal person. You had to do it during my celebration dinner. I met his gaze without blinking. You mean, the Christmas dinner our parents renamed for your promotion? Evan's jaw tightened. The one they told me was your big night. I continued calmly. If this is really about family and not about worshiping you, why does my success suddenly feel like an attack? He glared at me, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle moving. You always play the victim, he snapped. You never asked for more. You never said you wanted the spotlight. I didn't want the spotlight, I answered quietly. I wanted room to exist. There's a difference. Another heavy silence filled the dining room. I could practically see my parents trying to catch up in their heads, mentally rewriting years of family history in real time. But that wasn't my responsibility. I wasn't here to babysit their guilt. I was here to step fully out of the box they had kept me in for nearly 3 decades. I picked up my phone from the table and locked the screen. I didn't come here to beg for validation, I said as I pushed my chair back. I came here to tell you who I am now. Whether you can handle that is up to you. I stood up. Before I could take a step, my mom Marianne reached for my wrist. Odessa, wait, she said, her voice suddenly fragile. We just need time. This is a lot. I gently pulled my hand free. I've given you 28 years, I replied. Time isn't the problem. I walked away from the dining table, past the Christmas tree glowing in the corner, past the stockings hanging along the wall with our names stitched across the top, past the family photos lining the hallway. In almost every single one, Evan stood proudly in the center while I appeared somewhere near the edge of the frame. Just like always. In the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself. Calm, steady, not shattered. That surprised me more than anything. I wasn't the desperate 16-year-old girl anymore sitting in the bleachers and hoping my parents would look up long enough to notice me too. I was a woman who had built something world-changing while they weren't paying attention. Whether they ever caught up to that reality was no longer life or death for me. I reached the hallway before the storm finally caught up. Odessa. Evan's voice came from behind me. Sharp. Raw. A tone I had never heard from him before. I turned just as he caught up with me. For the first time that night, the confident polish he always wore like armor had cracked. You can't just drop something like that and walk out, he said. Watch me, I replied. I've spent my entire life swallowing things so you wouldn't feel threatened. Threatened? He barked out a humorless laugh. You think I'm threatened by you? You are now, I said. We stared at each other. Years of silent competition suddenly spoken out loud. Behind him, my parents hovered a few steps away. Not close enough to interrupt. Not far enough to pretend they weren't part of this. You don't understand what you've done tonight, Evan said, changing tactics. You made me look like an idiot back there. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. My boss is friends with Dad on Facebook. What happens when this gets out? When people find out my little sister built a company worth that much, and I didn't even know about it. His voice tightened. I'll look like a joke. There it was. Not concern, not curiosity. Just fear about his image. Your biggest fear is looking stupid, I said quietly. My biggest fear used to be dying in a hospital hallway because nobody listened when I said something was wrong. That's the difference between us. My dad Richard bristled immediately. Now that's uncalled for, he said sharply. We have always cared about you. You cared about the version of me that didn't make you uncomfortable? I replied. The quiet nurse, the helper, the good listener. You had a script for her, but you don't have a script for this version. My mom stepped closer, wringing her hands nervously. We're trying to understand, she said. We're trying to be happy for you. But it hurts, Odessa. It hurts that you didn't trust us with this, that you shut us out. I swallowed slowly, choosing my words carefully. You weren't shut out, I said. You walked out. Every time you interrupted me to ask Evan another question. Every time you forgot my schedule but memorized his. Every time you told me to be happy for your brother while I was hurting. I looked at both of them. You think being ignored doesn't leave scars? Evan scoffed. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You're acting like you were abused or something. You had a roof over your head, food, a good school. You had every advantage. Except being seen, I said quietly. Except being chosen. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. For a moment, an old instinct tried to pull me back. The familiar urge to soften the moment, to make a joke, to smooth things over so everyone could go back to pretending everything was fine. But then I remembered the nights I collapsed into bed after 12-hour hospital shifts. Eyes burning from staring at a screen while building something no one in this house believed in. That girl deserved better than silence. She deserved better than me backing down. So I straightened. Here's what's going to happen, I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. I'm leaving. You're going to sit with this. Maybe you'll be angry and call me ungrateful. Maybe you'll feel guilty. Maybe you'll pretend nothing happened. That's your choice. I paused and looked directly at them. But from now on, if you want access to my life, not my money, my life, it will be on different terms. My dad frowned deeply. What terms? I held his gaze without hesitation. You stop comparing me to Evan, I said. You stop treating my accomplishments like accidents. You stop asking me for favors you would never expect from him. And you apologize. I paused for a moment. Not just for tonight. For the last 20 years. Evan threw his hands up in disbelief. Apologize for what he demanded. For being successful? No, I answered calmly. For stepping on me so you could feel taller. For laughing at my work when you didn't understand it. For using me as a proof that you were the special one. He flinched slightly at that. Just enough for me to notice. You don't know what it's like, he muttered after a moment. Being under pressure all the time. Having everyone expect you to succeed. You're right, I said quietly. I don't know what it's like to have people believe in me before I've proven anything. I only know what it's like to spend all night patching people up in the ER and then come home exhausted and pour the last pieces of my brain into building something. While the people who were supposed to love me most called it a gamble. I looked around at them. We didn't grow up in the same childhood. Even though we lived in the same house. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my mom, Marianne, did something I honestly didn't expect. She started crying. Not the controlled tears she sometimes used to shut down arguments. These were messy, the kind that made her reach out and steady herself against the wall. We did this, she said to my dad, her voice breaking. We made them like this. We pushed them against each other without even realizing it. She wiped at her face, shaking her head. I thought we were just encouraging Evan because he needed it. I thought Odessa was fine. My dad's shoulders slowly sagged. The fight drained out of him like air leaving a balloon. We were wrong, he said quietly. We were wrong. And we can't undo it. Evan looked from them to me. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of losing the version of his life where he was always the chosen one. So what now? He asked hoarsely. You cut us off? You disappear into your rich world and pretend we don't exist. I shook my head. No, I build a world where I exist whether you see me or not. I held his gaze. You can be part of it if you're willing to do the work. If not, I'll still be okay. For the first time in my life, I truly believed that. I reached for my coat hanging by the door. My mom instinctively stepped toward me, then stopped halfway, like she realized empty promises wouldn't fix anything tonight. We'll call you, she said weakly, when we've figured out what to say. Take your time, I replied. Then I added one last thing. Just don't call asking for money. Evan's face flushed red. I never. You already hinted at it. I cut in. You asked how this would look for you at work. You're scared your boss will find out your little sister is more successful than you on paper. Newsflash. That's not my problem. You have your own path to walk. I stepped outside into the icy night air. The cold hit my face immediately. Sharp. Clean. Behind me, through the door, I could hear muffled voices rising and falling as my family started arguing inside the house. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But beneath the hurt was something new, something fierce. Peace. For the first time in my life, I hadn't folded myself into a smaller version just to fit inside their expectations. I walked toward my car, feeling like my spine had finally turned to steel. In the weeks after Christmas, my family did exactly what I expected. They went silent. No messages in the family group chat. No Happy New Year. No random memes from my mom. At first, the silence felt strange, like standing in a house after a fire smelling smoke and wondering what parts of the structure were still standing. So instead of waiting, I threw myself into my new life. There were strategy meetings with the company that had acquired Pulse Bridge, planning sessions about expanding the system to hospitals across the country. Visits to emergency departments where nurses' faces lit up when they saw how much easier their shifts became using the platform. For the first time in my life, the people I spoke to every day saw my mind first, not my place in a family hierarchy, not my role as the quiet daughter, just my work. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I did something that would have terrified the old version of me. I started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I was tired of carrying old wounds into new rooms. Many of those sessions were about my parents, about how being the ignored child can sometimes feel easier than being the problem child, but it still slowly eats away at you in ways you don't even realize. Favoritism inside a family is not just unfair. It is a form of emotional neglect that quietly damages everyone involved. My therapist once said something that stayed with me long after the session ended. When a family chooses a golden child, she told me they don't only hurt the invisible child, they also set the golden child up for a painful fall when the world eventually stops treating them that way. At the time, I nodded politely, but I didn't fully understand what she meant. That changed during the second week of January. I was sitting on my couch late in the evening when my phone lit up. The name on the screen made me pause. Evan Lane. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hey," he replied. He sounded different, quieter. "Can you talk for a minute?" "What's going on?" I asked. There was a short pause followed by a bitter laugh. "You remember how I said your little scene at dinner was going to make me look stupid at work?" "I remember," I said calmly. "You were very worried about that." "Yeah." He sighed. "Turns out I did a pretty good job of that all by myself." Slowly, awkwardly, he explained what had happened. After his promotion, the same one our parents had basically thrown a holiday, in honor of he had started believing the hype around him. He had been careless, mentioning client names in a bar where he shouldn't have, sending an email with the wrong attachment, making a few impulsive decisions while trying to impress a senior partner. Nothing illegal, but enough to make the people above him nervous. "They said I've gotten distracted," he admitted quietly. "They think my performance doesn't match my attitude anymore. They're reevaluating my future at the firm." "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it. Not because I felt guilty. I didn't. But because watching someone's identity start to crumble is painful even when that identity was built on a shaky foundation. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked gently. He exhaled slowly. "Because for the first time, I think I get it. Just a little." "What do you mean?" "What it feels like," he said, "when your entire worth is based on what people expect you to become instead of who you actually are. And when that expectation starts slipping, you realize you don't know who you are without it." I sat back against the couch, letting his words settle in. "You could have figured that out without trampling me for years," I said quietly. "But I'm glad you're starting to see it now." He hesitated before speaking again. "Mom keeps saying we need to apologize," he said. "Dad says he doesn't even know where to begin. They're pretty shaken up about everything. About you. About themselves." "They don't need a perfect speech," I replied. "They just need to tell the truth. Even if it's ugly." A week later, they did exactly that. My parents asked if we could meet at a small cafe halfway between my apartment and their house. When they walked in, they looked older. Not because of my success, but because they were finally seeing their own patterns clearly. My mom cried again, but this time she didn't try to make the tears the entire conversation. My dad spoke more than I had ever heard him speak about emotions. He admitted something I never expected. "I was afraid of you surpassing me," he said quietly, "in ways I didn't understand. So it was easier to focus on Evan's career, easier to joke about it." Both of them eventually said the words I never thought I would hear. "We are sorry. We were wrong. We can't undo the years we made you feel like the backup. But we want to do better if you'll let us." I didn't collapse into their arms. I didn't fix everything with one hug. Instead, I told them the truth. I appreciate you saying that, I said. But I need time. I don't trust words yet. I need to see what you do. Then I set boundaries. Real ones. I told them I was not their retirement plan. I told them I wouldn't be rescuing Evan from bad investments or paying off their house just because I could. And I told them if they ever dismissed my nursing career or treated my work like a lucky accident again, I would walk away. To their credit, they listened. Really listened. Change didn't happen overnight. But over the next year, slowly and sometimes awkwardly, it started happening. They began asking real questions about my work. When I talked about hospital projects or technology improvements, they didn't immediately redirect the conversation back to Evan. My mom would sometimes stop mid-sentence and laugh nervously. "I'm doing it again, aren't I?" Then she would correct herself. Evan's life changed too. He didn't get fired from the firm, but his fast track ended. No more constant praise. No more automatic spotlight. At first he hated it. Then slowly he began separating his identity from his job title. One day, months after that Christmas dinner, he asked me something I never expected. "Do you think," he said carefully, "you'd ever let me work at something you build? Not as your brother. Just as someone starting over." I thought about it for a long moment. "Maybe," I said. "If you're okay with starting at the bottom and learning from people who won't be impressed by your last name." He laughed quietly. But there was humility in it this time. Fair. Standing up for myself at that dinner table taught me something I wish I had understood years earlier. Being the quiet one in a family doesn't mean your story is smaller. Sometimes it simply means you've been growing in silence while everyone else was looking the other way. What mattered most wasn't the money or the success of my company. It was finally refusing to accept a role that erased who I was. Real change began the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen and chose to respect my own worth instead. I often wonder what you might have done if you were sitting in that chair that night. Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have spoken up too? If you've listened all the way to the end of this story, I'm genuinely grateful you were here with me. And if this message meant something to you, a simple like, comment, share, or subscription can help this story reach someone else who might need the courage to stand up for themselves today. Sometimes the smallest action can help another person feel less alone.